Welcome to the Elephant Room, where we talk about the things that most people don't, or if they do, it's kind of a check the box activity. And so we like to go a little bit deeper, a little bit broader, and try and get a little bit more real. And so, I don't think unless you're sequestered on a mountaintop someplace today that the topic of change isn't kind of omnipresent for everybody, right? I mean, we're all thinking about change at some level now, whether it's pandemic related, here in the States, whether it's racially or politically motivated. I mean, I think, whether you're just looking at career change opportunities, whether you're trying to figure out how to change or transform your business, change is on everybody's mind. So we're going to dive into that a little bit today. And I think what I want to try and do, though, is I don't really want to get into change methodology and change frameworks. I mean, we've all read the books, we've all hired the consultants, we've all, I'm kind of tired of lean, agile change management. I mean, been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. I want to talk about what really creates change, what motivates and inspires change, and what makes change stick. And so we can take that any number of directions, but I don't know. Without Roo, you want to kick us off today?
I don't know. This one's an interesting one because I feel like we can go in too many directions. And the one thing that comes to mind, if I bring it up from a perspective on a business with everything going on, and now I am a little bit biased given that I am in America, I am in Philadelphia, the heart of some of the craziness taking place in the country. Yeah. The one question I have in my mind is, from a company standpoint, should you say something, and when do you? Or is not saying something a louder statement? So it's an interesting dynamic, because I think you always find yourself in a place where you won't please everyone, and whether you do or don't, you still find yourself in a tough situation.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Shaina, what do you think?
I was just going to say, I went through this yesterday, or I went through it over the weekend, because my wife and I are co-owners, and we have a co-op of owners of our tiny house business. And there are a lot of different types of people in our organization, and we pride ourselves on being a community. So when we were thinking about how to communicate, not just to the public on social media, but primarily to them, we wanted to make sure that what we said wasn't just like a check the box kind of thing, or because people are going to expect us to say something, but that it really represented who we are and who we wanted to be as an organization. And we were going back and forth because like it kind of felt like there was a time sensitive thing to it associated with it, like you had to say it like in the time that everybody expects you to say something, or like you felt like there was something that you had to say in a timely way, I guess. But I took my time on it because I wanted it to be the right thing, and I didn't want to rush myself.
Yeah.
And I'm like running our marketing team, which is, as a fledgling organization, we're very like lean and small. So it's not really a marketing team, but it's me and a couple of us trying to like figure this out. But I wish Roo was on my marketing team, but yeah, so like it's just really interesting to think about like what you're saying and why you're saying it. Like, I think you really have to think about it and not just get swept up in what the hashtags are or what everybody else is saying.
Yeah, I think, herd mentality, we're seeing it all over the place, right? And it applies here too. And you'll notice that I haven't made a statement publicly yet. And it's because I don't want to rush in to chaos just to be part of the noise, right? Mm-hmm. Because when I speak, I have to speak. And Shaina, you said it so perfectly. You have to speak for the entirety of the organization, but you also have to speak for the broader ecosystem, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's not just your team and your organization, but it's your other constituencies. And I think, people just, they want to be the cool kids on the block. They want to be in the timeline. They're rushing to make a statement. They feel compelled to do it, or they feel if they don't, they're going to be somehow, maybe held accountable for not doing it. But for me, I don't need to be the first to open my mouth. I probably won't be the last. I may not get it right, but I'm going to make a very thoughtful attempt to get it right. And I promise you that not 100% of the people are going to be on board with what I say. And it wouldn't matter what I said. I mean, you're always going to have some people that are going to find fault in any type of mass communication. So it bears the burden of time and contemplation and thoughtfulness. Jaco, what do you think?
Oh, Jaco, you're on mute.
Jaco thinks on mute. That was actually very politically intelligent.
that was politically very correct. Put myself in mute. Yeah,
I can always learn from you, Jaco. I'm going to write that one down.
It's one of these things, I think, where angels fear to thread. I'll put it in a different perspective. I think we've talked about this, or I mentioned this in the very beginning. Growing up in South Africa many years ago, in apartheid South Africa, where it has always been very difficult to discuss these topics. I think it's very different now, but I do remember something which I'll share with you, which I'm really proud of, and maybe to answer the question, should one speak out or not? I think it's about compassion, and it's about what you believe in life, and it's about your own values, and it's about your own moral compass. I was a student at that stage. I think it was second or third year at the University of Pretoria, and we had the opportunity to vote, yes or no. It was a referendum against apartheid, or to keep the system that privileged a certain part of the nation, and I voted against the system together with my now wife, and it's something that we're extremely proud of. Something we tell our kids about, and it's when I get the opportunity, I talk about it. So obviously, being far away and seeing what's happening, it does bring back memories, and I think it's really difficult if you're compassionate and if you, believe in what's right and what's wrong, to keep an eye closed. So I guess that there's a lot of leaders that will speak out, and they will pick their own time and their own place to share their views of what's happening.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think it's appropriate, Roo, that you took us here right away, just given the world that we live in right now, and it almost seems trivial to talk about some other aspects of change given what's going on. I want to make sure that we cover other areas, but while we're on this topic, I think there's an element of just right thinking, and I think any sane human being can look at what's going on right now and understand the need for compassion, understand what's just, understand what's right, and understand what is just kind of craziness, right? And there's all of those things going on out there. And so I think we all have to have our moral compass, as you said, Jaco, but organizationally, we need to live with the values that we've chosen to put forth. And one of our core values is what? Do the right thing always. Yeah. And I don't think the right thing always is staying silent. I don't think the right thing always is speaking for my entire organization as a single individual. That's an abuse of my role and my seat. I have to think, I have to speak for all of you in a way that kind of represents us organizationally. And so this can't be about, hey, I believe X or I believe Y. It has to be how we're going to try and navigate this world organizationally and make a difference, right? And I think that's what people want to see from leadership. I think people want to see that leaders are actually thinking and doing more than thinking. They're incorporating it into some type of change behavior, some type of growth mindset. And so are we doing all that we can be doing or should be doing? If the answer is yes, fantastic. I promise you it's not. I promise we can do better. But those are things that are worthy of discussion, I think. Any other thoughts on this about, what's hard, what people are avoiding, what people should be doing, how organizations should be changing with respect to this?
To me, the one thing you mentioned is doing what's right. And to me, that's a trivial statement.
Can be.
It's hard for me to like step back and look back, giving at who I am and how I look. But the reality of it is that if I look at both sides, if there are two sides, they both think they're right for different reasons, but they both think they're right. So as a leader, it puts you in a tough seat, even in an organization, to navigate those waters. Because whether you want it or not, oftentimes you have to pick one. And it's hard to acknowledge that. And if you're in a publicly traded organization of some sort, then you have to understand, I'm going to either offend a portion of my clientele or the other portion of the clientele. So I think at the end of the day, it comes down to saying, these are our values. And if you participate and do business with us, we appreciate it. And it's not necessarily that I'm attacking you, but you have to stick to your guns sometimes. And it's hard to do that as a leader when you try to please everyone.
With that perfect statement, perfect conclusion. You cannot please everyone. You just can't. And you shouldn't try, because that's not leading. That's being a politician. I think, and you hit the nail on the head, Roo. I mean, if we're just talking about politics here in the United States, and, I mean, it's what we're seeing and what we're dealing with here, but it's a two-party system, right? And if you look at popular votes, or you just look at the outcome of elections in recent history, really close, right? I mean, you take one side or the other, you alienate 50% of the population, ostensibly. And so, but do you have to take one side or the other? Because I think I don't think you have to please all people. I think there's good in the Democratic platform. I think there's good in the Republican platform. I think there are very principled Democrats and very principled Republicans, and I think there are wingnuts on both sides that have no principle at all. And so I think if we just look at this through the right lens, we can. I mean, I don't think there's anybody that could have watched that video that says, hey, that officer did the right thing. I mean, at least I can't fathom anybody watching that and thinking that. And there were 3 other officers standing there watching it that didn't do anything. So I think just as a matter of common sense, right thinking, compassion, I mean, there could have been a different end to that. There should have been a different end to that. And it wasn't right acting. So there's protocol in every law enforcement division for how every law enforcement organization for how you restrain somebody and why you restrain somebody. And then there's the ability to exercise common sense. There's the ability to think about it. That just turned out wrong, and it turned out wrong for everybody. And, even for that officer and his family and their generations, there's going to be a big price to pay, right? So nobody wins when you make mistakes. And I don't want to just rule this as, a mistake was made. Maybe it was more than that. Maybe it was less than that. Maybe that's exactly what it was. Yeah, I don't know, above my pay grade, but it didn't turn out well, and it could have turned out better. It should have turned out better. So I don't think we have to be on one side or the other. I mean, I completely support law enforcement, but I want better law enforcement. I want more thoughtful law enforcement, but I also want those folks to be safe when they're out on the streets protecting our interests. Sometimes they get it wrong. Sometimes it's tragic, but they get it right a lot of times too. So I just think we have to focus on what's right and what's wrong. And we're all locked onto this one little incident. And now we spin it back to history and we look at other incidences. And it's tough, right? I don't know. It's a tough conversation.
It is certainly tough. And I think that what that event highlighted for me was like a last straw breaking, basically, because I feel like there are systemic issues that like make it difficult for policing to be done well. Like, it's not like policing in and of itself in a society is just, it's always going to be oppressive. And I think that like we need to examine other solutions for these issues that we're trying to fix with policing. So it's like, that's where it comes, that's where like
we're talking about change.
Well, exactly. Like that's where the difficulty lies in change. Like, you might think like, oh, that event was really wrong. Like, that officer made the wrong choice. But why did the officer make that wrong choice? Like, there's a much broader context that's impacting that one individual to behave that way. And like, that's where I feel like we start to fail when it comes to talking about change, because we do try to like boil it down to the most simplest thing, but it's not simple. It's extremely complex. And so we have to actually be able to have these conversations again and again. Like, we can't just talk about this for this week and then let it get carried away by the news cycle, you know?
You would fail if an incident like this, if it passed over and you kind of slip back into a status quo.
Exactly.
So you kind of hope that how tragic this event may be, which is a huge tragedy, that it is a form of a catalyst which inspires for real change, because that's what we do. And sometimes you have, even if you look at for instance, the aerospace industry, it was usually, and even the car industry, it was big tragic accidents which inspired innovation, which inspired change, which transformed industries. And one just hope, I'm sitting far away in Europe, but you just hope that a tragic incident like this, that there is some form of inspiration and energy in a positive way that come out of it, that do facilitate real change, and change to a higher order. If talking about the metaphysics, but really to a higher order, which is better than it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
Well, look, this country has transformed. It was birthed in transformation, right? And it has transformed itself time and time and time again. And, it will again. It has to, right? I mean, we can't continue down some of the paths that are just tragic and wrong and devastating, right? I mean, we can't continue to travel that path. And so is this the thing that's going to start the next level of transformation? I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope so. I think we'll see. It may not, but it should. So let's talk about the broader context of change, right? So what actually causes change? What actually allows an organization, a government, a team, an individual? What allows change to occur? Any thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts, but I'll let someone else go first.
Share them, son.
Yeah, go for it, Shaina.
So specifically to an individual level, because I think that might be one of the most difficult when you're thinking about like deeply held beliefs.
Yep.
In my experience, as a gay woman, I think that the only thing that made meaningful change was being able to like basically interact with someone different from you and realize that they're another human being just like you. And even like small things, and I guess this is where like stepping up and saying something really does make an impact, because like I can pass as a straight person sometimes. Like, if someone looks at me, they wouldn't maybe think like, oh, she's definitely gay. If they saw me walking down the street holding hands with my wife, then obviously they would know that. But like in the grocery store or whatever, especially when my hair was longer, like I can walk through the world without people making that kind of assumption about me. And so it almost made it more necessary for me to acknowledge it and say, this is a big part of who I am. And if you appreciate me as a person, or you value me as a person, like this is something that you have to then also value. Like this is something about people that you can't just like pretend doesn't exist. And I think that's why, like, for my family, like when I came out, my parents are both Democrats. They're like pretty liberal. They live up in Washington, tree huggers, whatever. But when I came out, my mom was really struggling because she's very religious. And it took her a couple of years to like, one, listen to what I had to say and then feel comfortable enough to ask more questions. And so I think that, yeah, just having the opportunity to talk about it and to like understand it is what bridges that gap. But when people are not willing to listen, or they are not willing to engage, because that's a two-person dance, right? Like one person can't just be like, I'm loud and proud and you can like F off. Like you have to be able to have that conversation. But the other person has to be willing to listen and be open to it, I think.
So let's drill down there a little bit, right? Because I think that's my opinion. Organizations don't change. People within the organization cause organizational change, right? And it always comes down to a people issue, whether you're at a team, an organization, at a government level. It's about people's change in their behavior and their attitude and their perception and their perspective. And so when you talk about change, it boils down to, are you willing to tell what is your truth? And are you willing to stand up for that? Are you willing to, be open enough to hear other people's feelings about that? Because you can't really get alignment just because somebody says, hey, go align. Alignment happens by people sharing and exchanging information, finding that common ground and figuring a path forward. And so, leadership's job isn't to say, here's where we are, there's where we're going, follow this path. It's to say, hey, here's where we need to go. How do we collectively get there by coming together and aligning around shared values, right? And that's where it always breaks down, because if the organization doesn't truly believe in the values and we're not communicating honestly with one another, how the heck are we going to plow the ground that we need to plow, right? But most people are not willing to have those conversations. So I'll give you a great example. Most people think that change is mechanical, it's process driven. It's methodology driven, right? If you have this change framework and you have this methodology, you just follow, you paint by numbers and you end up at the right place. How many times have we all seen that crash and burn, right? It does not work. Process is a good thing once you've got everything else figured out, but that's not the solution. It's an underpinning construct to help with the solution. Once you get the why figured out, then the how and the what and the when become easier. But the how and the what and the when can't just be bounded by process, right? It can't just be bounded in a methodology, because once you slip into that prison, that's exactly what that is, because those things bound your thinking, they constrict your thinking. They frame what you look at and explore and what you don't. They validate or invalidate conversations that you have. They direct the work that you can and cannot do. And that's not my definition of creativity and innovation. It's anything but that. So thoughts on that?
As I'm hearing both you, Mike, and Shaina, something that kind of, and it's kind of like a light bulb went up in my head. This is a huge opportunity to stop and listen and acknowledge. Because I'm thinking, if I go back to the political aspect of what's going on, I think what's gotten to the point that many people have spoken up. They've spoken up peacefully. And then once you get to the point where you've been talking nicely and people aren't stopping to hear you, then you start to rebel. And then what I've seen happening is, as people rebel, we are very quick to say rebelling is not the answer, but you haven't stopped to listen as to why am I doing it. And the reason I think about this is I saw that video, and for me to quickly relate to that video didn't take me but a second. As a teenager growing up in the Bronx, it wasn't once or twice that I was thrown in the ground and searched for no reason. That has just been my experience. That's how I grew up. That's been my relationship with policing. And to me, that was normal. But I understand that that's not normal for everyone, and not too many people take the time to listen. For me, I was able to relate to that very, very quickly. But if you haven't had that experience in your mind, oh, that is a one-off. That doesn't happen often. Why are we putting so much emphasis on this one? And in my mind, oh, that's the one that got caught on tape. Mm-hmm. Now is the time to listen. Let's see what people are experiencing and why they're saying it. And then how do we take actions to move forward? And I think right now, many people just want to be heard and acknowledged, just to say, hey, I hear you. I understand it. And sometimes instead of saying, what is the next step, is what else do you have to say? I'm listening.
Yep.
That was powerful, Roo. I think that pretty much summarizes like how I felt when my mom was like basically pushing back against me. She was like, why are you like this? Or like, why did this happen? And it's like, this is who I am, you know? And like, I just need you to like listen to me in terms of like what I need from you for support and like love, basically, in order to like continue existing. And I think that is a strong parallel to what you just said in terms of like, our next step should not just be like making decisions for these communities. Our next step needs to be going into these communities and doing more listening and research and understanding what the true issues are. Because I think we can all form an opinion on what's right and wrong, but they might not be informed opinions because they're going to be colored by our own biases.
Well, and that's, it's a great tie back to the business side of the equation, right? I mean, what you two just shared is the problem with organizational change is people don't listen. They don't take the time to understand. I mean, you guys have heard me say it 1,000 times, solutions that precede understanding don't end well. I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about here. So, it has to start with that learning journey and understanding and knowledge exchange. And then again, you can kind of get to a place of alignment. But while we have to care deeply about what other people think, we have to stop caring about what other people think about us, as an individual, right? So I want to care. I really care about, Shaina, what you're talking about, and Roo, what you're talking about, and Jaco, your experience growing up. And I want to process all those things, and I want to have those things inform me to be a better person and a better thinker. But at the same time, when I start to act on things, I need to stop worrying about, does this place me in the right spot? Is this going to cause me to be viewed a certain way? I mean, once you figure out where you're going, you got to go. You got to go.
I agree. I think it has a lot to do with authenticity. Being at peace with yourself. I think you can go, you can go everywhere and anywhere as long as you are at peace with yourself and you believe in your own value set, and you make decisions and you move forward based on that. To kind of sway the conversation back to business, because this is very relevant. Change, for me, it means adapting, the ability to be able to adapt. And you've seen it in history many times. I read the other day that I think there's about 10% of the Fortune 500 companies left that were there in 1955 in the Fortune 500. So it's about 52 companies out of 500. And the best guess is, the best estimate or the guesstimate, that maybe in 20 years from now or 30 years max, there will be maybe 50 left, which are now at this moment in the Fortune 500. And it's all about being able to adapt to the changes that you find as a company that comes your way. A lot of people think that companies are too big to fail, but we've seen the examples. I grew up with Blockbusters. Blockbusters. That was the only place you could rent a DVD or a videotape. They basically they died by digital death because they could adapt quick enough. They had the chance even to buy Netflix. 10 years ago, 50 million.
I think they died because of bad leadership, Jaco. I
They
wouldn't
died because of late fees.
Yes.
Like I'll say it, like I'll say it out loud. I think they failed to listen. They had a bunch of people in a boardroom that literally said people like the experience of filling the box and the VHS tape. And
right.
I think we have to call a spade a spade. They failed as a company because they didn't listen. And sometimes as a leader, what are some things that you can do to make sure that you're staying sharp? And I think as I hear this more and more, I think often having someone from the outside being someone that you can speak to. So that's why I believe an extreme amount in coaching, especially once you get to the levels of a top executive and like CEO or anybody in those top 2-3 tiers of any organization. 90% of the time, they don't have someone within their organization to tell them the truth.
Yeah.
And if they don't have that trusting individual that will come in and share, or sometimes throw almost a bucket of cold water in their face, it's like, hey, you're not looking at it straight right now. Like you're inside your own bubble. Is key to the success of many organizations. It'll be interesting to hear from both you, Jaco, and Mike, because you probably have found yourself in that seat where you're almost kind of like, hey, wake up right now. You're not seeing this.
Yeah. So how many phone calls do you think I've received over the last few days?
I don't
My
think
phone. It's just been. I mean, it's going off right now. It's all of my clients are reaching out, saying, hey, what should I do? How, should I make a statement? Should I not make a statement? Should it be video? Should it be in writing? Should it be a press release? Should I be doing town halls? And beyond the statement, what's next? Because, and that's where I'm focusing a lot of my conversations with people is the statement's inevitable. Do it, like I said earlier, on your own time, thoughtfully. Make sure that you're representing the entirety of the organization. But regardless of medium or modality or the length of the statement, that's not what you're going to be judged on. You're going to be judged on what follows the statement. And so, Roo, to your point, and kind of tying it back to what you're talking about, Jaco, and even what we're facing today here in the States, the number one thing that kills change is leadership. Always. Yeah. 11 times out of 10, even when the leadership is the person that gives the change initiative, or maybe the C-suite comes up with a portfolio of strategic change initiatives, even when they're sponsoring it, the success or failure eventually leads back to them, because they didn't understand, they didn't listen, they didn't engage, they didn't champion. It was, hey, go do X. That's not change. That's tasking. That's not change.
I'm having like flashbacks to whenever I was given kind of like a directive to make something change, like to instill change in our community, basically on our Air Force base. And I can remember like certain commanders, because there's so many levels of leaders in the military. I can remember going to certain commanders and just like seeing their like refusal to accept it basically on their face, and just knowing like, okay, this is going to be a squadron where like I am not going to be able to come here and be supported in this endeavor, and I've had like the very top leadership of the base who was like, this needs to happen and we need to figure out how to get it done like ASAP, like yesterday. And then not all, but many people in that like middle layer where it was just like they either weren't motivated or like didn't see the value or just like totally missed the memo on like what we were trying to accomplish. And that was so frustrating. Like I just couldn't believe that like if our wing commander was saying this needs to happen, there would be people in the middle who was just like, no, like they weren't going to be part of the change.
Yeah. So there are, in classic change terminology, there are change blockers, right? Mm-hmm. There are defenders of the status quo, defenders of what they've created, people that are challenged or intimidated or scared by the prospects of change because it's the unknown. They don't know how it's going to impact them. So, I mean, there are lots of basics here, right? When you're talking about change, people have to understand, you know, the old what's in it for me kind of thing. They have to understand what it's going to mean to them, what it's going to mean in concentric circles surrounding them. And they have to eventually buy in, right? And so when you identify those change blockers, you know, that's part of the change process. Because if you've got a lot of people that are risk managers as opposed to opportunity managers, that is not a good thing, right? I mean, if all you're doing is protecting your image or protecting even a product line or whatever it is, when you go into protection mode, Jaco, back to your Fortune 500 example, you know, that's where it gets you 11 times out of 10. When you start kind of bunker mentality, hunkering down, justifying, rationalizing, explaining, rather than disrupting, right? I mean, you kind of need, I don't know, edge walkers in the organization, right? Translators in the organization, people that they're focused on opportunities and building bridges and breaking down silos, not, you know, blowing up bridges and protecting silos. But that takes a lot of guts organizationally to give people that freedom, you know, to say, hey, if you know, see something, say something kind of a thing. I mean, that's what it takes to really drive change.
Yeah, you talk about the change blockers. I've been involved in many large change management programs.
Yep.
In my consulting days. What I usually did is, you know, from a psychological perspective, these are the, let's say a change blocker is like a defense mechanism. So I find it very interesting, and always found it very interesting to identify two types of let's say two large chunks of people. You always have the early adopters, and you have to know who they are because they help you to drive the change. But equally important is to find the people who are resisting this change. And people resist change because it buys them space. They need to deal with the situation. You know, they would go. We all know that Kubler-Ross cycle, which he developed, studying people that were dying, and it's being adapted to business. But it's a very, very interesting way of looking at resistance to change, and it's actually quite important. So even for us as leaders, intervening and trying to get to an alignment process, as you always call it, Mike, not change management, but change alignment. So to facilitate that change process, just as equally important to look at that, where are the blockers and why are they there, and trying to help people to get through that, be it the denial, you know, getting them into a position where they start to understand, you know, what's in it for me, as you explained, what's in it for me, and start to believe. And, you know, if there's a story of where you go to as an organization, you use the defense mechanism as a lever, it's easier to get where you can be. So I think the onus is also on those trying to facilitate change. It's not always the leadership, it's also bottom up.
Yeah, well, it's top down, bottom up, middle out, right? It has to work at every level, but it's identifying those constructs that help you navigate it, and I think ultimately that's why values and vision are so important, right? They're important when you're acquiring talent, because the people that you let into the organization shape your ability to drive change. And I think the one thing people ask me all the time, what's the one thing, if you have to find one thing that you look for in an individual, once we get past, you know, the character integrity thing, because you got to be able to trust somebody, what the next one down for me, I mean, it's interesting. It's anybody know what it is? Just huh?
Now you have me. I'm curious. What
growth mindset. You know, I want somebody that is forward focused, future leaning, you know, looking to make something better, not ever satisfied with, hey, this is our piece of collateral, we're one and done, right? It's okay. That's a great piece of collateral. What's next? I'm a what if, what's next, not what is. I'm not interested in fixing the present. I'm interested in getting to the future first, and sometimes you have to fix the present along the way to get there, but that's the minor theme. That's not the major theme. Yeah. And so, I want honest people that will speak their mind, that will be transparent, but have a big growth mindset, because those are the people that have failed. Those are the people that have gotten kicked in the head. Those are people that have taken risks and learned from those risks. Those are the people that move organizations forward. So, when I get people that want to, I've always said, I don't mind people that quit and leave, but I hate it when they quit and stay. I want people here that are here because they're trying to make a difference, not because they're just camping out, trying to collect a paycheck, right?
Yeah. Well, I believe, I like what you say, Mike. Let me start with that. I believe that the highest order of intelligence is exactly this: the ability to adapt. It's the ability to change, to a higher order, to improve. And that's what I, frankly, always tell my kids. It's not being the best tennis player or the best footballer, but it's about your ability to change and adapt. That is what's going to help you in life. And I think this is also very true, not to become the next Polaroid or the next Toys R Us as a company, but build the ability in your vision, leadership, but also through the layers of your organization, the layers you need to manage that organization. Have leaders and managers in place who understands the importance of the ability to adapt in the organization.
Do you guys have any advice for someone who acknowledges maybe intellectually that change is important and necessary, but struggles with actually internalizing that?
Like the people that say yes but do no.
Yeah.
I think your actions speak volumes, or your inaction, right? So if we're trying to go from here to there, and you're not enabling that path of progress, but you're gating it, I think that's where leadership comes into play, right? Because somebody has to step in and say, hey, here's what I'm perceiving, here's what I'm sensing, here's what I'm observing. Am I getting this right? And if not, help me understand. And if I am getting it right, let's explore why this is happening. But if there isn't somebody engaged in the organization, I mean, it's kind of that peer-to-peer accountability, but it's accountability up and it's accountability down. But if you really have that engaged culture, somebody's going to find that person. Somebody's going to figure out that there's something going on there. And we're going to find common ground. We're going to find alignment. We're going to get resolution or not. And if not, then there are tougher decisions to be made, right? But that's where organizations fail, is when they see somebody struggling with change and they don't do anything about it. And the first step needs to be what we've said, right? Listening and understanding and validation. But then what's next? Now how do we make this different, and how do we move forward, right? Because if you have that conversation, you leave and they stay in the same spot, that's bad leadership, right? So I think that's the key. You have to be engaged. Jaco, what do you think?
Yeah, interesting, very, very interesting question, Shaina. If you would ask me if I may for a moment put my psychology hat on, what I use a lot is what's called paradoxical interventions. So when you tell somebody to change, it never works. You can't tell anybody to change, but you can tell somebody not to change, and it works wonders. It works. Once you have kids,
reverse psychology.
Yes, it's like a reverse psychology. So you try to tell your child to do something specific. I mean, they do it up until a certain point and then they resist. They just don't do it. But what they can't resist is if you tell them not to do something. Then they'll jump on it. So that's usually what.
I think what you're bringing out, Jaco, I think what you're bringing out is what we've talked about. It's all about the individual. It's about the human. It's about the behaviors that they're exhibiting, right? And so when you're seeing the wrong behaviors, it all starts with understanding. I mean, you have to dig in and understand why. And they may have a valid reason that you're blind to, and maybe they're right and you're wrong. But if you're not aware, if you're not situationally aware, organizationally aware, culturally aware, philosophically aware, if you don't have that level of awareness, that's where things break down organizationally. So it's every one of our jobs here at this organization to be aware of what's going on and to help everybody be better, right? And if we find somebody that doesn't want to be better, well, I want to release them to go be better for somebody else, right? But what I want to do is try and get them to be better here.
Well, something that comes to mind as I'm listening to this is, as a leader, you don't want to be naive and think that everyone is going to come in and always have a crazy drive to push. There are people that play the game not to lose. And it's good to acknowledge that and understand that sometimes all this person needs to understand, hey, we're not going to lose if we take this shift. And we go in a little bit of different, they just need a bit of reassurance. But if you don't get to listen and get to know them at a personal level, that becomes extremely difficult to do, because you will never get to that conclusion. And I wanted to take a second to kind of give public kudos to like our CEO and like some of the initiatives that started recently of like starting this tea time where you get randomly partnered with somebody within the company. And it's this digital time where you just get on a video conference. You don't know who is going to be. It's going to be a random team member, and you get 30 minutes to an hour and you just talk about anything. And I think those types of conversations are the ones where you really get to know who someone is, so that when you really need them, or if you need to push them, or if you need them to push you and engage you, you have more of a personal connection to pull from. Sometimes keeping everything extremely professional, while it's, especially in America, has become the norm, gets in the way of moving forward as a business, as a company, or driving change.
Yeah.
Business is personal.
Yeah.
It's very personal. Great points. I mean, how well do you know the people that you work with, right? For me, it's hard, right? Because I haven't had the chance to meet everybody in this organization, and I probably never will. But I do get the chance to engage with them in venues like this, or in phone calls, or in various exchanges, and you observe and learn over time. But I think mostly, let me ask you guys this question. So just picture in your mind the best leader that you've ever encountered somewhere in your life, right? Picture that person in your mind. And the reason they're there is because they built into you, they breathed into you, they invested into you, they recognized you as a human being, not just somebody playing a role. They saw you, they felt you, they helped you, right? I mean, that's what makes a leader. Now picture in your mind all the bad leaders, that you've come across. They didn't do many of those things, if any of those things, right? I mean, this is not rocket science, but it is hard work. It's very hard work on both sides. And I think, we also have to examine how well we lead ourselves, right? You can't just place the burden on somebody else and say I wasn't led well. There's some personal responsibility that goes into this as well. But when those two click, when they sync and everything fires well, things get real fun real fast.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, Mike, if I may add to that, we're talking about large companies, and some of them do really well in transforming themselves, reinventing themselves. As you always used to say, pull the future forward, but actually they make it happen.
Yep.
I think one of the items I would identify that makes a difference if I look at companies as companies who have a compelling story, you know, a CEO who has a story, where he takes the employees and those people involved in that company from A to B. If Elon Musk says in 8 years ago, 10 years ago, I can help NASA to put somebody on the moon. You know, I think there was a few people who believed that he was meaning it, but he meant it. But more than that, he had this compelling story, and he managed to convey that story not only to shareholders to give him money to make this happen, but to buy the best people out of the market. He literally bought the best people from the most amazing companies, not only by money but by the story he had, and to bind him to the company. And that in that way facilitated a huge change in the aviation industry.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, we're back to talent, right? And I think, you know, we all have a part to play in the building of our story here. We have a part to play in the building of our story as a community and as a nation. You know, we all have our part to play. It's just how well are we going to play it? You know, are we willing to take the risk to play it well? Or do we have the courage to play it well? And those are personal decisions. And I think, you know, everybody comes at it a little bit differently, but when you're in an organization, you have to shape those differences so that they make the organization better, right? It's the differences that make us better, not the similarities. And I think that's what we need to recognize as a country, I think. And that's what businesses need to really recognize, is that if everybody here was a mirror image of me, we would have crashed and burned years ago, right? Because I'm just not that bright, you know. So I think what we need is people here that, you know, bring different things to the table and have different experiences and have different perspectives. And then we need to synthesize those in a way that we kind of inculcate those in the organization to make us a better organization. That's what needs to go on as a nation. We need to stop being this group versus that group versus this group versus that group. We have to be, you know, one nation, you know, that shares a vision and a destiny. And right now we've got a lot of competing interests and a lot of competing agendas. And we're not trying to figure that out. We're trying to protect, you know, our little piece of the universe.
So can I ask you this, Mike? Because I think as you were saying this came to mind. And as you mentioned, protect and holding on. And I see this too often. We're in the age of startups. There's a bunch of them going on out there. There's a bunch of entrepreneurs in the world. For someone who started a company and now has an entire team, one piece where I see many leaders struggling is letting go and allowing that talent that you acquire to come in and actually play the game. So what would be some type of advice that you would give to a leader that now finds themselves in a position where they need to let go in order to let the talent shine? And this can apply to companies, politics, and many different aspects.
Yeah. So, you know, I did an interview not too long ago, and I was asked that question. And my answer, you know, the question was framed as, looking back, what would you do differently knowing what you know? And I would have surrendered earlier, yielded earlier, stepped back earlier, lifted others up earlier, you know, because what hurt me as a leader, and still, I'm my own biggest enemy. I mean, I dove in today into a conversation earlier, and I probably steered it a little bit too aggressively, right? But I think that's how you grow an organization, is you let other people do what you hired them to do. You get the heck out of their way. You don't stand in their path. And so for any leader, and for me in particular, that has always been a challenge to me. I mean, you know, I am by nature a problem solver and an advice giver. And those are two dangerous things, right? You know, I need to be less the teacher and more the student. And I think those are principles that will help you grow an organization is bring people in that are better, smarter than you are, that have different perspectives and different worldviews, and let them run. Let them run. Don't yank on their bridle. That's not going to get it done. Let them run. So I guess that's my best advice. I mean, Jaco, what do you think?
No, I like what you say. I know you for many years, Mike, and I think that in the beginning, when we started to build, it was difficult for you to let go, and for
still is every day.
Yeah, for all the obvious reasons. I think if what's important is for any leader is to know your weaknesses. If you know your weaknesses, it's easier to let go. What I sometimes do. We had a call today with the chairman of the board of a company, talking about a new board position. And I actually know myself, and I started by saying, if I ramble on, if I take control, please step on the brake, because when I get enthusiastic, I want to tell a lot. We have half an hour, and we had Gordon and Vera in the call too, and I got the message at a certain point, which is great. So I think it's also a part and parcel of being a leader is obviously to know your strengths, but also to know where you should back off and step away, and give people the chance to actualize themselves and drive, put their energy where they're good at.
So you say,
Jaco, that's perfect. And let me add one other thing to this, because it hasn't come up yet, and we've talked around it, but it's really humility, right? I tend to be a pretty confident character, and I have to be careful not to let that confidence cross over into arrogance. Because there's a fine line there, and you can cross it far too easily and far too often. So I think when you learn the benefit of humility, which is, hey, there is no person out there that's always right. Nobody, and other people are smarter than we are, think quicker than we do, think deeper. I mean, it's like playing chess. I love to play chess. And I can move, I can think further ahead than some people, but there are lots of people out there that can think further ahead than I do, right? And so, one of the things I enjoy doing is playing computers, because that's, a challenge for me, right? It's, can I beat the algorithm? And, not very often, every now and then, but not very often. And so you have to know, to your point, Jaco, your weaknesses, where your strengths begin and end, where your weaknesses are, and how others can amplify your strengths and shore up your weaknesses, and be humble enough to walk into the room and say, hey guys, help me with this, because I'm stuck. I don't know. I'm thinking about this. What do you think? And a lot of leaders just can't do that. They won't do that. They have to be right. They have to be the smartest person in the room. And so I think, resisting narcissism and resisting your ego and surrendering to a level of humility, that will unleash growth in an organization. What do you guys think?
Yeah, when Jaco was sharing that story, I was thinking there's a level of vulnerability required in order to exercise that humility, right? You have to be humble enough to be able to recognize that about yourself, but then vulnerable to share that with other people.
Yep.
So I think that's really the only way, because if I am thinking just in my own head and staying, based on what I know, that's limited. I have to go out there and learn more. I think when I was thinking about, okay, first we got to listen, what comes next? We have to educate ourselves. There's still so much that we don't know about. And part of that is listening and learning from other people, but then also going and doing, having the intellectual curiosity, I guess, to go find that information for yourself too is really important.
Shaina, if I may conclude from my part, Mike, just with one anecdote, I would like to tell you, you mentioned showing your vulnerability. Something I've learned from my coach, who used to be the CEO of Aon here in Europe. And he said, Jaco, show people your lower belly. And he used the example of dogs. You know, you would see sometimes when dogs, when they get into a fight, one of them will lay down and show his belly, and for 100%, the other dog will not attack. And it's just about, I mean, it's a little anecdote, but it's about being comfortable enough with yourself to show your underbelly, you know, show your vulnerability, and that actually alleviates you and puts you in a much stronger position.
Yeah, that's a great story. I want to talk about one thing Shaina said, and then we'll wrap it up. But it's that intellectual curiosity, right? I think that is so key, because, you know, show me a person that doesn't change their mind, and I'll show you a person that has just sentenced themselves to a life of mediocrity and regret, you know, and missed opportunity, right? I mean, I'm not a spring chicken. I've been around a while. And if I look just even back 2 years ago, the amount of things I've learned over the last 2 years, already fairly mature into my career life cycle, it's phenomenal, right? And so the people that really get things done in life are the people that want to learn and unlearn, right? Want to challenge different norms and theses. I mean, they're looking to explore. It's kind of a discovery mindset. And so if you just think that, you know, you're trying to go from here to here, and this is the path that you want to travel, and you're not open to examining all the other different paths to get to that outcome, and even really challenging whether or not that's the right outcome, right? But literally being willing to continue to learn. I mean, you know, Roo and Shaina, you folks are, you know, a bit younger than Jaco and I, but just, you know, look at your career, right? And just look back 5 years and think about how much more you know today than what you knew 5 years ago. Now, fast forward 20 years. And if that doesn't blow your mind, it should, right? Think about all the opportunities that you have to learn and make an impact. You know, those moments are precious, right? So maybe we leave it there and challenge everybody and say, hey, look, we all have those precious moments as long as we're still breathing. Let's not waste them, right? Let's use them. Let's drive change in our organizations and our families and our communities, and let's just be better. So maybe that's a great place to leave it.
Well said, Mike.
Well said, Mike.